Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're going to tell you a story. And in some ways, it's your own story, because it's all about people in Yeovil enjoying themselves. What you see on the screen and on the stage this evening is really part of a bigger project. We've been slowly constructing a great archive of entertainment in Yeovil. And it includes all sorts of pictures, photographs, and documents. You will have seen some in the exhibition outside. If you haven't seen that, do go and see it. Old films, which otherwise have been gathering dust in cupboards. And one of the main ingredients has been interviewing a whole lot of people on video for their own memories, so that those are enshrined for the future. And I suppose one of the important things to say is that the things you see this evening happened here, in Yeovil, and in recent decades, of course, on this very stage. And so, ladies and gentlemen, our tale begins.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Ooh, as I walked out one May morning betimes, I overtake a handsome maid just as the sun was rise. What makes you rise so soon, my dear? Your journey to pursue. Your pretty little feet, they tread so sweet, strike off the morning dew. I'm going to feed my father's flock, his young and tender lambs. It's over hills and over dales, lay waiting for their dames. How glorious like the sun do shine, how pleasant across the mead. But I'd rather be in my true love's arms than any other where. For I am thine and thou art mine, no man shall uncomfort me. We'll join our hands in a wedding band, and married we will be.
The pictures you've seen were of people who sang as part of their daily lives. It was from them that so many English folk songs were collected and saved. Songs like that came out of a deep tradition of Somerset people entertaining each other and telling stories. One person who's often appeared here at the Octagon knows what they mean today.
It's absolutely certain that people in the 1300s or whatever were not any different from us now. They just did it in different clothes with different forms of transport, but that's kind of all. And a lot of the songs that we sing have a lot of information and knowledge and wisdom that we do well to listen to now, I think. That's what moves me, if you like.
Over 100 years ago, local people came together to form Yeovil Amateur Operatic Society, taking to the stage in 1902 with performance of Gilbert and Sullivan's Pirates of Penzance. In 1903, they presented the first of many productions of Iolanthe.
Beautiful, how gentle, how beautiful. Of all the young ladies I know, this pretty young lady's the fairest. Her lips have the rosiest show, her eyes are the richest and rarest, her origins lowly is true. But above the position I plenty, with grammar and spelling for 2, and blood and behavior for 20. Our origins lowly is true, a grammar and spelling for 2, with birth and position for plenty, and blood and behavior for 20. With birth and position for plenty, and blood and behavior for 20. Though the views of the House have diverged on every conceivable motion, all questions of party are merged in a frenzy of love and devotion. If you ask us distinctly to say what party we claim to belong to, we reply without doubt or delay, the party we're singing this song to. If you ask us distinctly to say, we reply without doubt or delay, the party we claim to belong to is the party we're singing this song to. The party we claim to belong to's the party we're singing this song to.
I'm very much pained to refuse, but I'll stick my pipes and my tables. I can spell all the words that I use, and my grammar's as good as my neighbour's. As from birth I was born like the rest, my behaviour is rusted but hearty, and I know where to turn for the best when I want a particular party.
Though her station is none of the best, I suppose she was born like the rest. She knows where to look for her hearty when she wants a particular party. She knows where to look
whenever I want a party.
for her party. She knows where to look for her party. Her
Well, I'm looking at a very nice black and white photograph of the Yeovil Amateur Operatic Society's production of Pirates of Penzance in 1903. Obviously, I wouldn't know any of these people, but there's a lady there, very, very young, and I think that could have been Olive Edwards. I knew Olive when she was very, very much older, but that's the only person that has any similarity to Olive. But it's a lovely picture to see. Now, in those days, of course, they were very limited because, one, they couldn't fly scenery, two, they were nearly all box sets rather than individual flyings and ins and outs. Very static shows in those days, not a lot of movement, not a lot of thought gone into it, because they didn't have the facilities. But now, of course, it's a different kettle of fish. They're just like the top professionals. But that was their biggest downfall, was the lack of facilities to enable them. There were no microphones or anything like that, you see. You had to project, which was good learning ground for projection, but very limited in the way they could perform. But when they did perform, they performed well. My name is Brian Saunders, and I joined the Yeovil Operatic Society in 1950. And my first show was the Gondoliers. And it all came about, a lady I worked with was in the society and kept on to me about, oh, please come and join us. We could do with a tenor voice. And eventually I relented and I went. And that was the best thing I ever did. I do remember my brother did a lot of comedy parts, and he was also very good. But we used to, in those days, certainly on last nights, we used to play pranks on people, which they don't allow today because it's not professional. But he played the part of Gringle, the underwear salesman. And he was going home, he'd had enough, and he had 2 suitcases outside the door that he had to pick up and take off and go off. But what the staff did, the stage staff, they put stage weights into the 2 suitcases and he couldn't lift them. And he said, well, I'm going, and he just walked off. Little things like that, and somebody said, that was good, you ought to put that in. Lots of things that go into shows aren't originally in there, but it happens, they get a good laugh, and they keep it in, as long as they don't overdo it.
I'm Jack Sweet, local historian. I'm standing in Princes Street just outside the old assembly rooms, Yeovil's main entertainment centre from about 1890 until the early 1960s. Everything happened here, dances, concerts. This was really Yeovil's prime entertainment centre until, of course, the Johnson Hall came on the scene. We had Amateur Operatic Society, pantomimes, and in the early 50s, Yeovil even had its own repertory company, the Rock Players. And we had 1 or 2 fairly famous names. Frank Middlemas was one of them. And I mean, he became quite well known, and he worked in Yeovil. I can remember going to see The Ghost Train. It's a wonderful show when I was about 14 or 15. It's a great time. It was a good place. It was very well attended.
The Operatic Society performed in several places over the decades, but the Assembly Rooms, also known as the Prince's Theatre, was its home for many years.
We then performed at the Prince's Theatre, which was a flat floor venue. The stage was not too bad, but there were 2 steps at the side that went up to 2 small rooms. One was for the leading ladies, the other was for props. And so then we had to go downstairs from the stage into a kitchen area with a dreadful old boiler that was stoked up and all the sulphur smells. And the actual main dressing room as such was under the stage, and it had an earth floor. So we had to put down rust matting. There was a rope put across more or less 2/3 and a tarpaulin strung up, and the women were one side and the men were the other. And that was the dressing rooms. And we had that the whole time we were at the Prince's Theatre.
I have some great recollections of the assembly rooms from our initial gigs there, which were a little bit rough. We got better as time went by. But it was seeing the sea of expectant faces in the audience. And you can remember this was the 60s. The fashions were loud and brash, and there was all these girls in front watching the band. And I have to say that that was one of the more pleasurable aspects of the business of being in a band. I think the decor was pretty basic. I can remember there being some green paint on some of the walls, and there was none of the club atmosphere that you have today. It was just an area where young people could congregate, have a good time, and possibly not do any damage to the building. And I think probably the word that would describe it would be austere. It was a dusty old place. There were dressing rooms that had been built years and years before. And the whole place smelt and felt of beginnings of decay. But we didn't care because we were young, we were kids, we had some money, we played music and we danced. And you don't need to worry about what the place looks like. The ambience was created by the people rather than the venue itself.
Elsewhere in the town, at the back of the Half Moon pub, the Yetis and their friends made a home for folk music.
In 1964, we started our own folk song club in Yeovil, and we booked all sorts of people we met at Sidmouth Folk Festival. We even had Paul Simon there, of Simon and Garfunkel, just before his records took off in the States. His fee was £7, but I paid him 10 because I thought he was good.
Well, I think the first time we were in Yeovil was with the Yetis. They ran a club at the Half Moon, and we played there. And we also went there, I think we were visiting, and somebody else, the Yetis were playing. But we may have been doing a gig there, and they were residents, presumably, at the club. And we knew them from London, mainly, because they stayed in our house, or they stayed with people we knew. You knew everybody on the folk scene in those days. Tim and I were travelling around all the folk clubs. They were all in the back of pubs. Everybody smoked. No PAs. You were singing totally acoustically. So you had to sing, you had to make yourself heard.
In 1967, another Yeovil pub found a role in entertainment and gave its name to the new occupant, the Swan Theatre Company.
The SNOW members are hard at work carrying out a complete conversion. They think it'll provide plenty of rehearsal space and give them somewhere to store props and scenery. They're working at weekends and in evenings. The job won't be finished for about 2 years.
There's no people like show people, they smile.
When this job's finished, they could be facing an even bigger challenge: to establish a 100-seat theatre on land at the back of the pub.
And there you are. Next day on your dressing room, they've hung the star. Let's go on with the show.
Some 30 years earlier, a tragic loss had deprived Yeovil of an important building at the heart of the community and started the long wait for a new major entertainment centre.
Well, the town hall was first built in 1849. It was a superb building. It was a town hall. It had concerts, plays, all sorts of productions there. But on a September evening in 1935, a gale was blowing hard. And at that time, there was the town hall had a superb clock turret, beautiful clock turret, which was provided by the local Dampier family to commemorate the coronation of George V. It was put up in 1912. It was gas lit, and on this particular night, it seems, at least no one really knows why the fire started, but it's believed that one of the panes of glass in one of the faces had broken. The wind came in. There was a lot of debris inside the turret, leaves, bits of paper, began to blow around. It was gas lit and it set fire. The fire started very quickly, and by the time the fire brigade got there, the town hall was well and truly on fire.
I'm standing on the site of the old town hall. It was destroyed by fire on September the 22nd, 1935. The council of the day then offered a prize of £1,000 to the architect who could design the best building to house both the new Civic Hall and administration offices. Along came the war, and the whole project had to be shelved. After the war, a Memorial Hall Fund was inaugurated here in Yeovil. Donations were received from local organisations, people in the town, and £40,000 from a prominent local businessman. Today, that fund stands at a little over £60,000. Now, they've collected £60,000 for a memorial hall. Do you think this ought to be used towards a civic hall?
Well, I don't think all of it should be used towards the Civic Hall. I think possibly some of it could be used for the youth movement.
I think it would improve the town. I think the people would go out more instead of staying home. I think they would go out if they had a very nice hall and a very comfortable one to sit in.
Memorial Hall, well, a bit boring.
It'd be a lot better because there's nothing much here for the young folk to do in Yeovil.
Really, I couldn't care less. There's nothing here. There's nowhere at all for any function to be held.
After the war, it was difficult to think of building anything other than houses. But in 1954, the council asked another architect to prepare another scheme and a model. It was designed to go on a site at Henford, which is roughly half a mile from here. The plan was finally accepted 2 years later, in 1956. And then a public meeting was called between the prospective users of the hall and the city council. And it pretty soon became apparent that this building would meet the requirements of no single organisation. And the cost was to have been around £750,000. Running parallel with this scheme, it soon became necessary to provide office accommodation for the ever-increasing administration staff of the town. And so a sketch scheme for offices and the new Civic Hall was submitted, discussed, costed, and finally left in abeyance, because nobody was prepared to make a decision. As a ratepayer of Yeovil, madam, do you think Yeovil needs a new Civic Hall?
Well, I think we need it, but can we afford it? That's the whole point, I think.
We've heard a lot about it and read about it in the paper, and there's been a lot of opposition against it, but I think that's been chiefly because people think it's going to cost too much, you see.
We haven't got one. We haven't had one for a long time. I think we should have one.
They've been talking about it for so many years, but I don't know whether ever to come off or not.
Well, I'd like to see in actual fact the whole of the city centre redone, all this part of it done up, and a more modern thing done, because there's an awful lot of wasteful space here, and the war memorials are rather in the way and so on. I think they could do something with this part of the town.
In 1958, the schemes were taken down from the shelves, dusted off, in order to look into office accommodation, which by then had become an acute problem. No solution was found, however, and so they were put back into cold storage until 1962. Then 2 schemes came up before council. But owing to the fantastic increase in the cost of building charges, the council were forced by public opinion to hold an open meeting. An architect was briefed, and he prepared no less than 5 different schemes, all of which were rejected by the town council.
The benefactor who in the years after the war pledged £40,000 for the new hall was Stanley Johnson. He was born in Yeovil and ran the gloving company started by his father. The list of causes he supported is a long one. This carving was made by a furniture maker from Bruges in thanks for help with housing and jobs that Belgian refugees received from him during the First World War. And so it continued. For example, in the Second World War, he provided work, funded a mobile canteen, and subsidized cinema tickets for soldiers and airmen. He gave the town its sports ground, funded a building for the hospital, and equipped the town band with instruments. Stanley Johnson's granddaughter remembers the man.
Well, I was 9 when he died, so he was always an old man. He was known as the old man in the family. I called him Pop. I was at school in Yeovil for about 3 or 4 years before he died, in day school, and my father used to drive in and out, and we would see Grandpa Pop probably every other day, or maybe every day sometimes. He lived on Henford Hill, and I would go into his house. We'd be greeted by the housekeeper, Miss Broad, who would always say, "Good afternoon, Mr. Keith, Mrs. Keith." And my sister was Miss Sally, I was Miss Philippa. And we'd go in and see the old man, and he'd be sitting in his chair, in his dark suit, with his stand-up collar, with a fag out of the corner of his mouth, and ash tumbling down his tummy. And he'd say, "Hello, little girl, who are you?" And I never know, I still don't know, if he knew who I was or if it was just winding me up. This photograph used to hang in the rugby club in Yeovil in Johnson Park. And it's a clever photograph because the eyes follow you about the room, which they did when you were a teenager dancing at the rugby club with one's boyfriend, just what you needed to have grandfather staring at you from a photo frame on the wall. If ever he gave you any money, I mean, he'd always give you £1 and say, you spend a penny and then you save the rest. Those are my sort of best memories of him.
It's now 1965, and still no definite decision has been taken concerning the new Yeovil Town Hall. We asked the Mayor, Mrs. Ivy Seed, to discuss this matter with us, but she declined. But we do have Councillor Bob Pritchard, a member of the Estates Committee. Councillor Pritchard, it's 30 years since the old town hall on this site was destroyed. What is happening about a new civic hall for the town of Yeovil?
Well, I personally think at last the council is thinking realistically. They've recently decided to scrap all the previous decisions and start afresh. The previous decisions, in my view, were unrealistic, overambitious, so that now, I believe, we shall go ahead and get something done.
Since the original scheme, in which the prize was £1,000, the council must have spent £10,000 on architects' fees and models alone. Do you think it's fair to keep spending the ratepayers' money on projects which are never going to take place?
Well, it does seem unfair, but perhaps these were steps that had to be taken before one could get to the realistic problem and the realistic solution to this problem.
It's 1965 and the start of a new year. What prospects can you give the ratepayers of Yeovil about their chances of having a new civic hall this year?
The prospect this year, nil. But I think now that they can look forward to some movement.
Any ideas when they're likely to see any visible structure rising?
I might well transgress committee secrecy, on this if I went any further, because there are movements in committee, but it would be premature to state them at this time.
So you could say that there is a definite hope in the near future they will get their new civic hall.
I think so, yes.
It's perhaps a little unfair to suggest that the problem of Yeovil Town Hall is a mere 30 years old, for I have here a copy of the Queen's Jubilee number of the Western Chronicle, the private eye of its day, dated Tuesday, June 21st, 1887. And in the ads column it says, "Wanted new town hall for Yeovil to hold large Liberal meetings." And in a column headed Historical Guide to the Town of Yeovil, it says, "During the Roman occupation of Britain, the Emperor Carausius visited Yeovil to take advantage of the corporation baths and to talk to the electors in the new town hall, which it is anticipated will shortly be erected." Rome, he remarked on this occasion, was not built in a day. Point taken, sir. Good night.
By 1966, people were starting to get really, well, no, you know, we've got to do something. You're sitting there, all you're doing is arguing where it's going to go. And in the end, the decision was made. The die was cast. We will provide a new civic hall on the Henford Manor site. And over a period of a year or so, they produced a design. I remember we had one meeting where Councillor Cooper gave us all a load of felt tip pens and a big sheet of paper and said, we'll design a hall on this. It was as basic as that. Work started in the early 70s. The council put money to the 200 odd thousand pounds estimate, £220,000 I think it was. And in July 1974, Johnson Hall was opened. The thing that always sticks in my mind was being given, or the members being given a felt tip pen and designing a building from scratch. And we have an interesting building as a result.
In my junior school years, I lived opposite in number 62 Hentford, which was Chapel's Bakery. It's all demolished now. But my playground was this site on which the Octagon's sitting. And behind here, there was a little cottage. There were lots of cottages and houses in Hentford then. My playground was across here, and we used to come up a slope, and there was a cottage, and Mr. Martin used to keep chickens, and I used to play with the chicks. And if my memory serves me right, there was a tennis court, honey bees in a beehive, various apple trees, because I love russet apples, and I'm sure I must have scrumped some when I was that age. And there's lots of other memories. In fact, I can still see on the coach house across here the same old pear tree that was there when I was a small child. So there's lots of memories here.
I was present at the opening of the Johnson Hall. I have the invitation from the chairman, Reverend Prebendary W.J. Taylor, and the members of the Yeovil District Council to the official opening of the Johnson Hall in Yeovil on Friday, the 12th of July, 1974 at 11:30 a.m. for buffet luncheon. By admission, by production of this invitation only, which is why I still have it. It was quite a grand occasion, lots of important people. I was sitting in the body of the hall. My father was on the stage. And I know that I remember feeling rather proud. At long last it had been opened.
Well, this is an entry that's in the Salvation Army, Yeovil Salvation Army Corps History book. And there is an entry, 1974, December the 15th. Our family carols this year was presented in the newly built Civic Hall, Johnson Hall. Over 700 attended, and many others were unfortunately disappointed. What a challenge this gives us to spread the gospel of Christmas. Of course, the Johnson Hall is nothing like it is today. It was more like a village hall. Come and get the key, clean up and clean up afterwards. I remember that the night before our carols, there was a supermarket that had their Christmas party there. So arriving at 9 o'clock in the morning, the first thing we had to do was basically sweep the place up and get it ready. I think it was sort of fairly early in November that they had the first people to put on a show. And we were there on the 15th of December. We were certainly the very first people to ever fill the hall.
When we moved in, it was very basic. There was hardly anything there at all. We put up some of the bars for the scenery. I say we, that's the YAOS company. We put up bars for the scenery. We put up lighting, which was our own. We made flats where there were different widths, and some of them are still being used. The framework of them is still being used today. So we put quite a lot into the theatre, ropes and wires for putting up the scenery, and some of it is still there, being used by the pros when they come in.
Now, sometimes the atmosphere at the Johnson Hall was utterly different from how it is at the Octagon today.
1, 2, 3, 4.
My name is Klondike Kate. I was a professional female wrestler for 36 years. Been around it for around 40 years. I started when there was very few women wrestling, and I was absolutely in love with it from the minute I saw people wrestling, and they were male, not female. And I kept thinking, oh, I'm the wrong sex. I just want to be a wrestler, but loved it. Looked at it and thought, there are girls, but I'm very plain and very chubby, and it ain't going to happen for me. But it did, I loved it. So, yeah, that's what I did for a living. Started to watch wrestling from a very early age. I was with my gran, who was one of the handbag brigade at the Victoria Hall in Hanley, Stoke-on-Trent, another really famous hall. And she used to take me there, and she was up there with her handbag hitting all the wrestlers, and that's where I got my love for it. But I actually stepped into a ring for the first time when I was 14. So, very young. Johnson Hall was a really good atmosphere, and wrestling's all about cowboys and Indians. And I think people used to come to wrestling, still do today, to get rid of the aggression. They love to shout and scream at their favourite wrestler. And if you sat and watched a technical match, it'd be fantastic. They'd love all that, lots of claps and everything, but they loved a villain.
I don't give a damn about the crowd. Wouldn't you, looking at the state of them out there? They come to see all this blood and guts. This is what they want. They don't want all this arty-farty rubbish, all this wrestling gun moves. They want to see blood, and they want to see people getting knocked about.
I think I did my job really well, because I was absolutely hated there. Nobody ever dared come up to me and speak to me, and very rare did they come and ask for autographs. But in the ring, I would look for somebody who was giving me grief, and I would give them as good as they gave me. But I think it's because they could get up and shout, and nobody would look at them like they'd gone crazy. It was that kind of atmosphere. I think once I got banned because I think I said something about the Lord Mayor's wife at the time, so I don't know who she was, but I did get into trouble, so I wasn't allowed back for a couple of years, I think. But it was a fantastic hall. I loved it.
For some people, the Johnson Hall offered a world of opportunities.
Yeovil featured very heavily in my young life. The Johnson Hall, especially. I think it was the first theatre that I ever went to. The first stage that I ever stood on, the first stage I ever acted on. So I made all my mistakes and did all my learning there, and probably you discovered that I wanted to be an actor and take it up on a professional level at Johnson Hall. I remember very clearly all the shows that I did there. I remember Johnson Hall in my life more than I remember my school days or anything like that. It was I would go from show to show to show, and school was, just something that I did in between the shows.
Back in the days of the Johnson Hall, we did pantomime a couple of years with some youngsters from Yeovil. This is Humpty Dumpty. And we did West Country evenings as well, which basically meant we took over the whole theatre, the foyer as well. And we had all sorts of daft things going on. And some of the firms would hire or buy tables for their staff, and they'd come along and have a bit of a knees up. Well, don't do that anymore, do they? And then we appeared with various people. This one is Yeovil Town Band, obviously. A nice contrast in music. And then with dear old Fred Wedlock, the oldest swinger in town. Very cheeky little chap he was, Fred. He really was. And this is a bit of a sad night in a way. It was a Christmas concert in the Johnson Hall, and it was the last time that Bob Common appeared with us. This is the end of 1979. He decided to leave the band. He gave us a year's notice, so very gentlemanly of him, really, very Dorset-like.
Yeovil
was really, really close to my heart, because there was a very good understanding from the management's perspective of as how I wanted to develop pantomime. And everybody who played Yeovil for me, and they may have played the Canterbury Marlowe or the Whole New Theatre, much bigger theatres, they always would say, you know, when can we go back to Yeovil? And there were several reasons for that. One, you've got a great team from front of house right the way back to backstage, you know, a great crew.
But there were questions. Was a multi-purpose hall quite what was needed? Was it perhaps neither one thing or the other? Did it need a stronger identity and purpose? The media, of course, expressed the cynical view.
Just on the other side of the town is this massive building. It's the Johnson Hall. It looks to most people in the area something like a massive water tank. Some people call it the biggest porter cabin in the West, but to most Yeovilians it is their hall. It's a multi-purpose hall, and as you can see as we look at it, it's a pretty bleak looking place, but there's no doubt about it that it has been successful from the inside point of view. It does everything. You can have dancers there, you can do what you like. But again, like so many things in Yeovil, the Yeovil people don't seem to have supported it. There's something like 150 people managed to go to a performance which could take 600 or 700.
When the Johnson Hall was first put together, I don't think anyone at that time appreciated you would need to have any form of professional management. The conventional wisdom at the time, I think, was that you have a hall, someone wants to use it, we will caretake it, we will look after it, but it's up to them to provide the services such as bars and things like that. It would be licensed, but, or they would have to get the license. And I think there was a comment made once that, well, if you have a bar, we can have some trestle tables and a cloth. And it wasn't until the actual hall was well almost completed when I think the members realised that we've got something here. Rather, it's not a village hall. It's not it's an entertainment centre, and it's not until John White managed to persuade the South Somerset District Council to convert the Johnson Hall into a theatre that, in my opinion, my humble opinion, the building took off. Up until then, it was a bit of a camel.
Because it was a multi-purpose hall, and so the intention was that it could serve the community in whatever they wanted. Of course, as so often happens in those sort of situations, it doesn't actually serve the community very well at all. For example, this was intended as a place where you could have a dinner dance for up to 600 people, except there were no kitchens, none at all of any kind. Well, that's perhaps slightly untrue. There was the kitchen you have now upstairs was a quarter the size it is, and that was it. That was the only thing that was here. So it was quite impractical to try and do that sort of event. It was also an exhibition hall. As I say, they did do the Ideal Home exhibition, but again, the problem that everyone encountered was this strange shape, because there are strange angles everywhere. Now, as we all know, for an exhibition hall, what you want are nice straight lines where you can set out the stalls. And of course, that couldn't happen here, because as soon as you'd gone a few yards, you came to a strange angle that didn't fit anything. Sports hall, it couldn't work for the very simple reason that in the design, they'd put windows all the way down the sides of the auditorium. So, you know, that was obviously a hazard. We did have, however, do roller discos here, which were quite popular for a short time. But that, as I say, was where it started, and we had retractable tiered seating, which were very new then. Hardly anyone had designed these sort of things. And again, because of the peculiar shape here, it didn't kind of work very well. Nominally, you could seat 559, I think it was, but that wasn't really people who could see the stage. There were 100 seats that you just simply couldn't see the stage from. So, in fact, it was 449 seats you could sell, but some of the best parts of the auditorium had no seating in at all, because the geometry didn't allow for the fact that you could have this sort of folding arrangement. Apart from which, of course, the problem that always a multipurpose hall encounter is the cost of changing from one facility to another. So if you want it as a dance hall and then you want it as a theatre, there was actually 8 man-hours of work to change it over. And of course no one wants to pay for that, because if you hire it as a dance hall, you don't want to know that someone spent hours and hours preparing it. You just say that's what I want and I don't expect to pay any more than any other flat floor venue. So it was never ever going to be practical. And then it came to the point where the tiered seating started to crumble and fall apart, and so something had to be done. And we got quotes in for all kinds of various seating that could be retracted in the same way that the previously had been. But as a sort of afterthought, I slung in the idea that perhaps it wouldn't be a bad idea if we actually changed it and had fixed seating in. And to my surprise, at the meeting, the council meeting, that got seized upon. And it got seized upon principally by the out-of-town members, because they had always had this sort of gripe about the fact that here was what effectively was Yeovil's Village Hall, that they were having to contribute to the cost of. Because that was one of its early problems, is that it was anticipated it was actually going to cover all its own costs and it would probably make a profit and contribute to the rates, instead of which, of course, in its first year it lost £50,000 and that caused no end of problems. But as I say, the out-of-town members recognised that as a theatre it would become something that they could sell to their community, because they didn't have anything like it. They all had their own village halls, but they didn't have a theatre. And so if we could put a theatre here that would actually bring in shows that otherwise wouldn't come to Somerset, then it was something they would back. And they did. And that's how it came about. And that was, of course, 88 when the fixed seating was put in.
So what does it mean to be a performer? What's it like to go on stage before hundreds of people?
I was here. Oh yes, so this is my mum playing Annie Get Your Gun years and years ago now, and this is me playing Annie Get Your Gun in the production that Mum directed when I was at school, and I think we're wearing the same costume. Well, it looks like we are anyway. Maybe. My family have been part of amateur dramatics in Yeovil since I can remember. Mum and Dad moved from London, where they were part of the Wood Green Amateur Operatic Society, and they moved down to Yeovil and married, and obviously wanted to get back into amateur dramatics again, and Yeovil was there and available to them, so they made themselves part of that social circle, took the lead parts often, and then it was decided that Mum would step away from the acting side and do more of the directing, and Dad would do, you know, the leads. So yeah, so it was constant. Mum would direct every show, Dad would be the lead. Mum would direct, Dad would be the lead, and I'd be a dancer, or my sister would be in it, my brother would be in the band, you know. So we were all, as a family, part of that. And then part of youth theatre as well. So we kind of, it was the thing we did together as a family. So it was a great social bonding exercise for us as a family, I think.
And you still don't know. Tony is one of them!
Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull said, performing he said it's the most public and most private place.
A boy like that would kill your brother. Forget that boy and find another. One of your own kind. Stick to your own kind.
And I think that sort of says it quite well, because it is, in many ways, very public, and yet there is a privacy that you have as well about what you're doing. And you try and communicate that, but in a certain way, there is still a privacy that you keep in a performance. And it's when it works, it's just the best. When it's not so good, it's incredibly depressing.
For
amateurs, certainly for people like me, quite nerve-wracking, certainly in the early days, but there's tension because we're not used to doing things in a particular order and a particular time and being in the right place. Derek has complained to me more than once when it was my responsibility to get the songsters onto the stage at exactly the right time, that some of our ladies were still down in the bowels of the building, in the rooms at the bottom there, still clambering up those concrete steps. So that was unfamiliar to us. And but it's a matter of, you know, that there are all those people who, for a large portion of the carol service, we can't see because they're in the darkness, of course. But there are all those people waiting on what we do and say and sing and play.
What's it like walking out on a stage, live theatre?
Well, obviously, yeah, it can be nerve-wracking if you're doing something you're not used to doing. But, you know, obviously I thoroughly enjoyed it. Otherwise you wouldn't do it. I always said, in this business, you know, you're not actually in it for the money, you're doing it because you enjoy doing it. And I've always considered myself extremely lucky to be able to make a living singing from his supper, you know.
At cook and meat me mother were a wonder. She quickly shifted all of father's plunder. As fast as she was able, she slapped it on the table, ready for his kiss to tear asunder. And every fry up we had rabbit, to fill our pie up we had rabbit. There were soused rabbit, doused rabbit, tender rabbit, slender rabbit, fatty rabbit, patty rabbit. Rabbit soon became a habit. Father, he would leave the house in search of pheasant, deer or grouse, but all we ever had were rabbit.